He stood there in court, tiny, shaking, with eyes too wise for 10 years old. No one expected anything unusual. It was just another routine custody hearing. But then, he looked up at the judge and said 7 words that stopped time. "You're my mom. I remember you." And just like that, the entire courtroom gasped. What happened next was something no one could have predicted. Not the lawyers, not the media, not even the judge herself. But this little boy had been carrying a truth in his heart. A truth so powerful, it shattered years of secrets, exposed a past buried in silence, and brought a mother and son face to face in the most unbelievable way. If this sounds like a movie plot, think again. This is a real story, and by the end of it, you'll understand why this moment left the world speechless. So before we dive in, do one thing for us. Hit that like button, subscribe to RealTalk Stories, and turn on notifications, because every week, we bring you real-life stories that challenge prejudice, spotlight truth, and remind you that hope isn't just an idea, it's a force. Now buckle up, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after the video ends. Judge Eleanor Grace had seen everything, or at least she thought she had. After 2 decades behind the bench in Chicago's family court system, there wasn't much that shocked her. Broken families, desperate parents, system failures, heartbreaking abuse. She'd presided over it all. Her life had become a careful balance of composure and detachment, with just enough compassion to remain human, but not so much that she'd crumble from the weight of it all. But nothing could have prepared her for Isaiah Carter. He wasn't loud. He wasn't angry. He didn't cry or throw a tantrum like many children dragged through court. He just stood there in his oversized thrift store blazer, his tiny fingers curled around the sleeve of the CPS worker beside him, and stared at her. Not in awe, not in fear, but with recognition, like he knew her. The courtroom was frozen. Judge Grace blinked, the boy's words still hanging in the air. "You're my mom. I remember you." The court clerk glanced at her nervously. The bailiff stepped closer, unsure if he needed to intervene. Eleanor cleared her throat, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm sorry, young man. What did you say?" Isaiah's voice didn't waver. "You're my mom. I know you are. You used to sing to me. I had a bear. You gave it to me. It smelled like your hands. Like oranges." It wasn't just the words. It was how he said them. Quietly. Certain. Like someone who wasn't guessing. Someone who remembered. The courtroom murmured. Eleanor sat back in her chair slowly, her face blank, but inside her entire body was trembling. She looked at the CPS worker, who looked just as stunned. I think we need a recess," she said, barely able to get the words out. 10 minutes. She stood and walked quickly into her chambers, closing the door behind her. Her legs nearly gave out. She braced herself against her desk, heart pounding. She didn't have children, not officially. That had been her truth all her life. She'd thrown herself into her studies, her work, her career. She had told herself motherhood wasn't in the cards. She had buried that part of herself, along with a chapter she never spoke of. But now there was this boy, and he knew things no one else could know. She stared at the wall. The memory she had fought to forget began clawing its way back. 21 years ago, during her final year of law school, she had found herself pregnant. It was the result of a brief, toxic relationship with a man who had vanished the moment she told him. Her family, deeply religious and extremely controlling, had forced her into secrecy. They told her it would ruin her future, that no man would marry her, that no law firm would hire her, that no judge would ever respect a single mother. She was sent away to a private clinic in another state. She remembered the pain, the confusion, the fog of drugs. She remembered holding someone, for just a few seconds. A baby boy. She remembered the smell of citrus on her skin. The nurse had whispered, "He's healthy." And then, he was gone. Her mother told her later the child had been stillborn, that it was better not to think about it. Eleanor had cried for months, but eventually she buried it all. She built a wall, and she climbed it. Straight into the courtroom where she now sat in a robe of authority. But now, that wall was crumbling. 10 minutes later, she returned to the bench, face composed, though her hands trembled under her robe. She asked the CPS worker to remain after the hearing. The hearing itself wrapped quickly. Isaiah had no relatives stepping up, no viable permanent placement. The agency had requested a 90-day review for foster placement. When everyone began filing out, Eleanor stopped the CPS worker. "Miss Cole, may I speak with you?" Privately, they stepped into chambers. Eleanor sat down. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "How long have you had Isaiah's case?" Cole looked uneasy. 6 months, Your Honor. He came into our care after his last foster placement failed. He doesn't do well in new environments, but he's smart. Too smart. And he's always asking questions. He keeps saying he doesn't belong in the system, that his mother is alive. Eleanor looked down. "Has he ever mentioned me before?" Cole shook her head. "Number not by name, but he's always describing someone. Said he'd recognize her if he saw her. Honestly, we all thought it was just hope. Just trauma." Eleanor hesitated. Then she whispered, "I want a DNA test. Quietly, no media, no leaks." Cole blinked. "You think?" "I don't know what to think," Eleanor interrupted. "But if he's right..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The test results came back in 3 days. Eleanor didn't sleep during those 72 hours. She didn't eat much either. She stayed late at the courthouse, her mind spinning, replaying moments, memories, questions. And then the envelope came. She sat at her desk, alone, hands shaking as she opened it. She scanned the page, and when her eyes found the words 99.998% probability, she dropped the paper and gasped. He was her son. Isaiah, the boy who had survived everything, the system, the silence, the lies, and found his way back. Tears poured down her face as years of grief surfaced like a tidal wave. She had lost him once, but somehow, impossibly, he had returned. What followed was complicated. Technically, she couldn't adopt him while actively serving on the bench in her jurisdiction. Ethics committees got involved. The media got wind of the story. For a week, it was everywhere. Judge discovers her long-lost son in court. Talk shows, podcasts, headlines. But behind the scenes, something more powerful was happening. Isaiah moved into her home temporarily under emergency kinship placement. For the first time in his life, he had a real room, his own bed, a closet, meals that didn't come from school trays, a woman who sat with him at night and listened to his stories. They talked for hours. She told him everything. What happened? What she didn't know. What she was told. How she'd cried for a child she thought was gone forever. Isaiah didn't hate her. He listened. He nodded. Then he said, "I knew you didn't leave me on purpose. I could feel it. I've felt it my whole life." And she broke down. Over the months that followed, Eleanor took a sabbatical. Isaiah started therapy. She did too. Healing wasn't instant, but it was real, tangible. They went to the zoo, the museum, made pancakes on Sundays. He started calling her mom slowly, testing it out. The first time she heard it, she had to leave the room to cry. She framed the DNA test, not because she needed proof, but because it was the receipt of a miracle. Eventually, Eleanor applied for formal adoption through an independent court. The judge who signed the order said it was the only time he'd cried during a finalization hearing. Today, Isaiah is 15. He's thriving, top of his class, speaks at foster care advocacy events, wants to be a civil rights attorney. Eleanor returned to the bench, but not the same bench. She now oversees reunification and kinship cases in a newly created family restoration court, inspired by her own story. And every morning before court, she peels an orange, places it in Isaiah's lunch bag, and smiles. Because now, he doesn't just remember her, he knows her. If this story touched you, please don't scroll away without liking this video, subscribing to RealTalk Stories, and leaving a comment. Tell us, do you believe in fate or was it something greater? Because sometimes, the courtroom isn't just where justice is found, it's where lost hearts come home.